So as we go, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll try to keep it, going where you want it to go. But we have a lot of content, a lot of information. So if things are going too fast, feel free to put that in the chat as well. But there'll also be plenty of time at the end for discussion and questions. But yeah, as things come up during the presentation, especially if they might be relevant to others, feel free to put those in the chat. And for those just joining, please share a little bit about yourself in the chat, where you're coming from. My name is Matt Feinstein. I'm the Co-op Clinic Program Manager here at the U.S. Federation of Worker Cooperatives. The Co-op Clinic is our peer-to-peer network and our technical assistance program of the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. And I'm based in Central Mass. I use he, him pronouns. And I was part of a grassroots co-op incubator, as well as a member owner of a media cooperative for many years. So I'll be sharing some of my experience as a worker owner and as someone who started a co-op and now works with other folks looking to start co-ops. So the Co-op Clinic offers free 30-minute consultations where we can go through, where are you at? What are you looking for? What kind of resources can we get to you right now? And what kind of resources would you be interested in down the road? Or can we pair you up with a peer advisor is often how we do it. Someone who is in a worker co-op or has worked in worker co-ops and is now an advisor and a specialist in governance or finances or conflict and accountability or, lots of different topics. So feel free to request that when you feel ready and you have an idea of what kind of support would be useful for your project. You can do that at, actually the link has changed. It is usworker.coop/clinic now. So try that one if you, there's lots of information and ways to get involved there too. For those just joining, please share a little bit about yourself in the chat. Let's see, we have some folks from Texas, Boston, West Virginia, Minneapolis. Welcome, everyone. Great. So a little bit about co-ops in general. This is one way of classifying cooperatives. Consumer cooperatives are where people come together as buyers, right? And they form a cooperative to meet their consumer needs. These are common in natural food stores and other sectors as well. And so the member owners of those cooperatives are the consumers themselves. There's also producer cooperatives where people have come together to sell and market their goods or their services and or to purchase together. And so producer cooperatives are common in the agricultural sector. Ocean Spray, cranberry juice, for example, all the farms that make up that cooperative, it's the farm entities and the owners of those farms that are the owners of the cooperative. It's not all the people working at the farms that are members. That's the difference. Whereas in a worker cooperative, it's the people that are the workers that make up the member ownership of the cooperative. We'll be focusing on worker co-ops today, though plenty of people in our network and and people interested in this movement find that one of these others might fit, or a multi-stakeholder, right? A hybrid of these, where you have consumer owners consumer members, consumer owners, and worker member owners, or producer and worker co-op. So please remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking. Thank you. So again, we're focusing on worker co-ops, but it's a good technique to think about who are the main drivers of this entity that you want to start, and could it be a combination of workers and consumers, for example? But we're focusing on the worker co-op. A lot of worker co-ops start because they, the founders really see, a path towards good work, fair pay, job security, but also have a vision that a need for the community, right? Co-ops exist to meet a need in the community. And so a thriving worker co-op can have, all of those. You may start with some and be stronger in some in the beginning, but it's important to have all of these in mind, that you're creating good working environments, fair pay, but also taking into account the needs of the community. Now, worker ownership, worker co-ops have these two components. They have a joint ownership component where people share the risk and the reward. They receive financial benefit as participating in the cooperative. And there's democratic decision-making. Co-ops in general have both of these elements, right? Members come together to have financial benefit and to jointly own the entity. And they also democratically control the entity, whether that's voting for the board of directors or operating as a collective and making a lot more of the cooperative decisions. But it's important that both of these are involved if you're wanting it to be a full worker cooperative. Now, there's plenty of initiatives that don't have the ownership component that are democratic workplaces. So nonprofits, for example, that want to organize democratically. We have plenty of democratic workplace members in our federation, for example. Staff-directed nonprofits are one example of that. There are other kinds of nonprofits that are democratically managed, and that's one approach as well. Then there's also employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs, that have the joint ownership component, right? It's employee owned, but they don't necessarily have the democratic control. There are a few ESOPs that have full democratic control as well, but worker co-ops have both of these components, and it's on the basis of one worker, one vote in the democratic decision making. And just to get a sense of where things are at nationally with worker co-ops, there's about 465 verified worker co-ops in our latest census, but we know there's so many in formation and that are not, didn't respond to our census that we estimate around 700 to 900 worker co-ops. It's a little hard to track down the exact number. Now, that's not a huge number compared to other cooperative sectors or other, worker co-op movements in other places around the world, but it's a growing and very active and connected movement here in the US. And this is the racial breakdown of the worker co-op movement. It's a majority Black, Indigenous, people of color led cooperatives, and the majority of worker owners in our member cooperatives are BIPOC. And that may, not be in line with certain stereotypes around co-ops. Maybe, the hippie co-ops of the 70s are what come to mind when you think of cooperatives. But that's not the situation of worker co-ops historically or currently necessarily. So there's a well-documented long history of Black cooperatives, of unionized cooperatives, of and very active movement of Latinx cooperatives and immigrant-led cooperatives. So, that's really the, folks of color are leading our movement, but it's a very broad range of people and communities that are using the worker co-op model to advance their communities. So I recommend that book by Jessica Gordon-Nemhard if you're interested in the history of Black cooperativism, especially in the US. So let's go through the co-op principles. These are internationally recognized principles for co-ops of all different sectors. Voluntary and open membership doesn't mean you have to let anyone into your co-op, but it does mean you can't be discriminatory in how you set up your processes for letting in co-ops. And it also means that there's a commitment, especially in the worker co-op movement, to an anti-oppressive approach to your hiring, to your membership track systems, and it's a key value in our first principle. Democratic member control we talked about, right? It's a one worker, one vote situation, and the workers, it may be involved in electing the board of directors, or it may be a more day-to-day involvement in the decisions that affect them in their workplace. It depends on the scale or the industry or the governance structure that the group has decided upon. But the basic principle of democracy in the workplace for worker co-ops, or democracy in the enterprise for co-ops in general, is a key one. Member economic participation, we also talked about. People are sharing the risk and reward. There's almost always a membership fee, an investment in the cooperative as you start a cooperative, and that allows you to get access to not only working in the cooperative, in a worker co-op, but also the share of the profits that's based on patronage. And in worker co-ops, that's how much you work in the co-op. We'll be getting into that more. Autonomy and independence is a key principle that there's ways of having federations, of having franchises, of having close relationships between other organizations and co-ops, but you're not going to be a local chapter of a national organization that is dictating how your co-op operates. You're going to have a certain level of autonomy and independence. Education and training and information in co-ops is an active principle. It's not just that you open the information, but that there's active training and education, so that there really is the shared power in the cooperative, and that you can get to number 2 to have that democratic control. Principle 6, often called P6 because it's such a key one between co-ops working together. Cooperation among cooperatives looks like lots of different things in different places. It can be along supply chain arenas. I remember when I was just learning about cooperatives in Argentina, for example, the Sanon tile factory was providing tiles for the renovation of a 4-star hotel that was worker owned as well. And the hotel was providing space for national assemblies of all the recovered factories and worker cooperatives in Argentina, and a recovered Adidas plant that they changed to the United Footwear Cooperative was selling shoes in the hotel and providing childcare for a lot of Buenos Aires-based co-ops. So, for example, that's just one network of all these co-ops coming together and supporting each other in both supply chain and shared service, and there's lots of great examples all over the US around that principle as well. If you have an idea in a specific industry, you can probably find a co-op in a related industry and ask them, how do they do it? What are your books? And co-ops are often very open to sharing that kind of information with other co-ops. So, Um, Number 7, concern for community. That's a real, a listening process to what are the needs of the community. That's often the basis for a co-op, that you see a need in the community. And there's, an important feedback situation with cooperatives and the community about continuing to meet the needs and to not do harm like many other corporations are able to do and justify it in the name of profits. Whereas co-ops have as a principle concern for community that includes environmental justice, climate justice, inside the practices of your business. How do you make sure that you also take the community and the environment into account? So those are the 7 cooperative internationally recognized principles. There's some additional principles that are recognized by union cooperatives and kind of set forth by the Mondragon Cooperative in the Basque region, Spain, which is the largest federation of worker cooperatives. And those include the sovereignty of labor, that labor has its ability to organize, and the instrumental and subordinate nature of capital. That's kind of a mouthful as a principle, but so whereas in corporations, profit can drive everything, right? And in a cooperative, capital is very key. Being well capitalized is a very important part of starting a cooperative business, but it's also subordinate to the mission and to the workers, and to the well-being of the worker member owners of the co-op. So that's a key principle. And another one is wage solidarity, where the highest paid worker in your co-op is not making more than a certain ratio that you set out, at the founding of your co-op, more than the lowest paid. Whereas, a lot of the Fortune 500 or the CEOs are making 400 times what the lowest paid worker is making in T-Mobile and all those. Whereas in worker co-ops, usually the ratio is something more like 3-to-1 or 5-to-1, depending on your industry, right? And you commit to having that wage solidarity. So again, co-ops start because they envision democracy in the workplace. They're committed to shared decisions. They're committed to sharing the wealth that it's generated by the cooperative. So whereas in other corporations, the more you invest, the more you get in return. In a cooperative, it's the more you patronize the co-op. In a worker co-op, the more you work in a co-op, the more of the profit share that you get. And the idea is for that to be a mechanism to share wealth and to build wealth in an entire community, not just in a few people that are able to invest more. And also community, right? Sharing a vision and culture with a broader community and creating that within your co-op. So a co-op, should have all 3 of these. You may be stronger in one of these as you get going and can bring in other components. Let's give an example. The Cero Cooperative in Boston, for example, formed because there was a group of Black and brown workers, for the most part, that were organizing and looking for, coming out of grassroots organizing and looking for solid ways of making living wage jobs for their communities. And at the same time, there was a concern around climate justice and food in the waste stream. So Cero came just as compost regulations were happening in Boston. Restaurants had to start composting, and they started a collection business and have a whole fleet of trucks now, and have multilingual staff meetings and have created a really good workplace for a number of Boston residents. So they're able to balance that, need for democracy in the co-op, running a profitable business, and benefiting the community as a whole. I missed there's a question about the name of an organization. I don't know what that's referring to. If you can put another question in there, I can come back to it. And then we talk about conversions as well. So today we're focused on startups, right? People who are just starting. Cero, like the Spanish word for zero. Cero.coop, I believe, is their website. So we're focusing on startups, people who are starting cooperative enterprises and just starting the business. But there's also a lot of people that come to worker ownership looking to bring an existing business to a cooperative, and we call that a conversion. And this process is quite the transformation, right? There's a fundamental and irreversible change that happens. The change can be messy, it's an emergent process. And just like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly, it can become something really beautiful. And in that transition process, that transformation, a lot of things can come out around how decisions are made, around how racial equity is dealt with in the workplace. But it can also be a really key moment for longevity and building legacy for the people who have put so much into a business. There's tax incentives as well. So, a lot of what we'll be talking today also pertains to converting an existing co-op, an existing business into a cooperative. But there's a lot more resources on that at becomingemployeeowned.org. Lots of good stories and things. So we're going to be breaking down the different components of starting a cooperative business and things you'll want to think about. You can also take this way of breaking it down and think about your team and who in your team might be focused on a certain area as well. We're going to talk about co-op capacity. That's the internal work. The business development, that is the entrepreneurship and figuring out the right legal structure and that kind of stuff. And then ecosystem development, connecting out there with others. So let's dive into the first one, co-op capacity. And that's really thinking about the team, who's a member, how do you delegate work, and accountability. So first part is building a shared vision. I know when people introduce themselves, at least a few people have a vision, but don't have the team yet. Well, that's a key process, right? To move past your idea into our idea and finding a team that can really build that broader vision together. It can often be, a process that needs a lot of facilitation, maybe outside facilitation, and a lot of time thinking about how do we come together with our passions and with our understandings of the economic and social need that's out there. And one way to do that is through book clubs or shared learning around different components of cooperatives. So for example, as we were starting the Future Focused Media Cooperative, there were 4 of us that were doing media production of different sorts. I was focused in documentary filmmaking, another person was doing youth media work, and we all had our little pieces of equipment and a couple clients, and we came together with a little bit of a different vision, but we had this whole facilitated process where we came up with a broader vision of Future Focused Media Cooperative that brought in the multiple components. We were doing fee-for-service video production for grassroots organizations. We were doing our own documentary projects, and we were training youth. And we were able to buy better equipment together, share an office, do joint trainings, and work on the projects together. And it wasn't an easy process to create that shared vision, but it was a really important one. Another example in Western Massachusetts that we've worked with as well, Riquezas del Campo farm, um, where a bunch of people were involved in a worker center, an immigrant worker center that were working on wage theft issues and had a common vision for worker justice, but also had agricultural experience from their home places in Central America mostly. And so they came together and also had a whole facilitated process of over a year of sharing that vision. And they formed a really strong worker cooperative vegetable farm. And it continues to kind of morph as people come in and bring other visions and components and focus areas. But this also, in this first area, people will be thinking about what it means to be a member, right? Setting really clear expectations. Members will be involved in XYZ. They will be able to vote for the board. They'll be able to run for the board. But will they also be involved in regular financial decisions, or is that relegated to a different, component in the cooperative? Being really clear about what it means to be a member and what it means to be part of this founding group or steering committee before you even form your entity. And as you do that, building in really strong rights and responsibilities, even in that formation, and asking for real contributions from folks of time and investment, and think about what those rights and responsibilities look like in different arenas. So there's the financial participation, right? You have a right to work there and to get a profit share based on your patronage. But then you also have the responsibility to pay your membership fee, to provide that labor consistently, to be involved in approving a budget, or electing a board that approves a budget. And then you might be responsible for losses in not so good years. So, that's an example. There's both the rights and the responsibilities, and that needs to be clear from the very beginning. And the same goes for, education, governance, information, and other arenas too. When we talk about governance, you have the right to vote or run for the board or be involved in, if you're a collective, in many more decisions. But you also have the responsibility to understand, the process, and to vote and to carry out autogestión, right? The self-management, self-governance, that you have to walk the walk and really participate in the processes that you and your co-op are setting up. And that has to be really clear for someone coming in year 2, 3, 4, 7. They need to know that that's an expectation of them, that it's not just like another job, that it's it's an ownership responsibility and a democratic place that expects participation. Another good practice that this first arena will be looking at is delegation of work, right? Not letting one person do all of the work, finding really good ways of distributing the tasks that are meaningful to folks. This might not come if you're already working, in a group and then forming a co-op. Maybe you've worked out some of these kinks, but if you're just, forming relationships and building trust with people, then this might be the hardest part, right? Is figuring out how do you distribute the tasks and how do you all engage in a meaningful way and not just have someone show up and say yes to everything in a meeting and go home with no role after that between the meetings. So, a person or a team working on this first arena will be looking out for that and providing, avenues for people to have real true engagement. And they'll also be setting up systems of accountability. So it sounds simple, but doing this consistently is really key and is often overlooked by co-ops that are trying to do so much at once as you start. But you have a list of tasks, who's doing the task, by when, and then you check in on that each meeting. See if the task has been done. If it has, you celebrate it. If it hasn't, you ask, what's going on? Do they need more information? Do they need more support? You don't just shame the person who hasn't done tasks, but you check in what's going on underneath that, right? And and you don't shy away from holding each other accountable, especially in, in a collective situation. If you have no boss, you need to be each other's accountability partners in this process. So setting up good systems for that is key from the very beginning. Even before you've incorporated, even before you're in operation, you can practice that in the formation of your co-op. Let's give an example. Llama Pepper Farm. They love their llamas. They love their peppers. They were growing some great peppers. They're having a blast on the farm. It's a lot of work, but they realized they were coming together in pretty regular meetings, but their meetings were kind of a mess, right? They didn't really know who was doing what. A lot of key important tasks were being dropped. They weren't really progressing in terms of setting up all their systems of governance or incorporation. So they kind of took a step back and they said, we're not gonna expand to that other field this year. We're gonna focus on our internal systems, and we're gonna build in systems of accountability. So they set up a grievance process, right? What happens when there's harm done or someone is not following through on their tasks and it needs to be brought through a grievance process. They even talked about suspension and removal of members. They set up some mentorship, and they set up job descriptions and work plans and peer evaluations, and they had consistent tasks at meetings, and they found they were, much more effective meetings, much more effective at getting things done between meetings. And then they went back in year 3 to really focus on the happy llamas and the beautiful and spicy peppers that they were growing. It doesn't need to be one or the other, but finding a way to build in these systems is really key. So, that's that first arena, right? Is the accountability, the figuring out membership, the engagement. And then the second arena is about business development, creating value for customers, figuring out the legal form, raising capital, and figuring out management structure. So creating value for someone else, right? If you are already involved in startup businesses, you know how central this is. But for many of us that are into starting a mission-based, a passion-based business, we know what we want to create. We know what services or goods we want to put out there in the world. But we need to make sure that we're creating, a value for a customer, and really understanding who the target customer is, what their key problems that you can address. Are they not able to access it in a certain geography? Are they not able to access it quick enough? Are they not able to access something of high enough quality? And then what is your current solution for that? Are you able to make something that's more affordable, more convenient, higher quality, that meets a specific technological need that didn't exist before, or whatever it is? Be super clear on what that value is and where your product fits in the broader market, right? And be able to really clearly articulate that. So there's a lot of tools out there. The lean startup model is a tried and true one, where you're out there with a product, you put it out there, you get validation, you test it, and then you rebuild it, right? So it's a process, a cyclical process where you can adapt and you can shift and you can create, a product or service that fits the market even better, before you've invested everything, put all your eggs in one direction. You go and test it and you get some feedback. And start.coop has a great learning module that's based on the lean startup model that you can take. There's an online course, there's other resources, and they have a an ownership model canvas. So people might be familiar with the business model canvas, where you can see the different players, your customers, how that relates to your supply chain and to your product market fit. It helps you, articulate and have a visual. Well, you can do that and also see how ownership plays into it in this tool that Start.coop developed. And at this point, it's really key to, we'll talk about it more, but surveying your customers and really understanding what they want. And, having a solid marketing plan, right? To make sure that you will get to the market that you're laying out in your business plan, right? And there's a whole book about marketing without advertising. You don't need to spend millions of dollars on advertising in every industry, and some you may need to. But there, marketing without advertising, there's a lot of good tools there. But the main thing is to not just, think about the passion of what you're bringing, your service, your product, but also understand your customers from a really deep sense. Really talk to and engage with them, understand what they're looking for, get their feedback, adapt to that. Because if you're not able to have financial sustainability, your co-op could have the most beautiful process and team, but not be able to survive without the correct revenue streams. So don't overlook that. And there's so many resources out there for small businesses in general, right? Small business development centers, lots of different university opportunities, Center for Women in Enterprise, lots of different resources for small businesses. So, and at least half of starting a co-op is starting a small business. So you can get those resources there, the financial projections, your marketing plan, a lot of different things, business plan reviews, SCORE might be a good resource for some of you. That's a retired folks that can look at your business plan and help. So when we think of the startup process, we think, oh yeah, it'll be such a linear thing. You go from an idea to a team, then you'll build your business plan, then you'll build your policy documents and your governance, you'll form a legal entity, and you'll be in your operation. Great. That's not usually the real process. The process is much more of an iterative, cyclical, touch here, do a little of this. I think the overlapping tasks and different levels of completion is an okay thing. It's hard to complete everything all at once. And you may start your business plan, then continue to build your team and some governance, and then come back to your business plan, and then be in partial operation, whereas you test certain business ideas, and then finalize your market plan, and then form your legal entity. Or it could happen in a number of different ways. But it is important to plan out these steps and not jump over huge steps without having at least considered different aspects of your marketing plan, for example, or without figuring out really clearly what your legal entity will be. So in terms of legal entity, there's a lot of questions that would be good to discuss with your team before you sit down with a lawyer. If you just sit down with a lawyer and say, what are my options? They could either steer you in a direction that's not really right for you, or they could rack up a $10,000 bill going through a lot of the questions that might be better for you to just discuss, to do your own research, to work with a co-op developer or a peer advisor with our network through. And then you go and say, this is how we want it to operate. Can you help us find the right legal entity for us? We know that we want members to be involved after a trial period of 6 months, because in our industry, that will be enough time for us to get to know them. We want to make decisions with a sociocracy, for example, which is a team-based consent governance and decision-making process. Or we're still exploring decision-making. We want to strive for consensus, but we'll have a fallback vote for things. So we know we want to make decisions this way. We know that we want to elect a board. We know that there will be a fee to join, but that fee will be reimbursable when someone leaves. Or no, the fee, we want it to be really low and it won't be reimbursable. make those decisions early on, get research, see what other people in your type of co-op are doing, understand the pros and cons. We have tools to help with those kind of questions. And also figure out, how will the profit be divided? Will you need outside investors? Is it important for people to be taxed as owners of the company? Are you working with mixed status immigrant populations and want to make sure that everyone's an owner of the business and has a legal right to own the business, instead of being treated as an employee? If so, maybe an LLC is a good entity. No, we're going to need a lot of outside investment, and we understand that people giving outside investment won't necessarily have a vote in our cooperative, and we'll clearly share that with them. But we want to make sure we can raise enough capital to build our series of urban greenhouses and hydroponic systems. And so we're going to run an investment campaign. And so maybe a corporation, whether it's a cooperative corporation or a C Corp or another type of corporation, is our best bet, because those are better for outside investment, for example. So think about what you need, the way you're going, and then talk to a lawyer. And we have lawyers in almost every state that understand co-ops. That's really key to get a lawyer. There's a whole community of them. And even if there isn't one in your area, there are folks that work across state lines on certain kinds of things too. So, follow up with us if you need a lawyer referral. I'm going to go a little bit over how money flows through a cooperative. You don't need to know all the details of this, so don't let it overwhelm you. But it is good to know the basic mechanism, because it's something very unique to cooperatives, right? And it's really about taxation. And it's really about figuring out a way of being taxed where you're not paying tax both at the corporate level and at the individual level on the same money that's flowing through the cooperative. And the IRS's subchapter T allows for that. So this is how it works. You have surplus that's generated by the members. If you have profit that's generated by non-members, say there are people still on the track that aren't members yet, that goes into a collective account, it gets taxed at the corporate level. But let's look at all this stuff that's surplus, that's generated by the members. You have some of it, your first choice point is that some can go into the collective account, and also called the retained earnings account, and that's taxed at the corporate level. And then some of it, a portion of it that you decide, usually on an annual basis, goes into member patronage. And that's usually based on the number of hours worked. There's a few other ways of doing it, but that's generally how it works in worker co-ops. So member patronage, okay, it's allocated. So workers are taking home that profit share, and they're paying taxes on that individually. So since they're paying taxes on that, and they're paying taxes on it for the year that it's allocated, you need to pay out some of it in cash, usually at least 20% of it in cash. The rest of it, you have this great mechanism in worker co-ops that use the subchapter T taxation to invest it back in the co-op and keep it in the co-op on the balance sheet. Looks good for your balance sheet. You can reinvest it to purchase more equipment, to do a growth plan. But it's that individuals, they've worked for it. They've earned that portion of the profit. And it's held on a spreadsheet for them when they leave or when the co-op is ready to pay that out. So what does that look like? In this blown up piggy bank, you have your membership fee or your initial capital contribution. Maybe they've invested some more, it goes in there. And then each year you have the little yellow piggy bank that adds on top of it, right? A written notice of allocation, it's called. It means you don't get this cash right away, but it goes into your internal capital account and it's yours when you leave or when the co-op can pay it out. And it can build up year after year. You can build a larger internal capital account. Now it also goes down if there's losses too, potentially. So that's the basic mechanism. You don't need to know all the ins and outs of it, but know that that exists, and know that you can set up a way of reinvesting in your co-op without paying double tax on it. And there are accountants that can help you set this up and make sure you're filing in the right way to achieve that subchapter T taxation. Feel free to throw any questions. I know that was a lot. But just know that that mechanism exists for cooperatives. So we talked a little bit about raising startup capital. Lenders are a great way to go. There are several cooperative lenders that are set up to lend directly to co-ops. And they are very experienced with working with co-ops. So they might be able to look at your business plan and your financial projections and give you some really valuable feedback. And they may not require, most of them don't require personal guarantees or individual credit scores, but some of them may require collateral, right? If you can't pay the loan back, what equipment or other collateral may you put on the line so that they make sure they don't lose all of their investment. But most of them are really going to be looking at your business plan. Do you have a solid team? Are you connected to other co-ops? Are you, is your product really have value? Have you shown already, some value that you're providing? Those kind of things is really what they'll be looking for as you apply for a loan. And a loan is, it's a term situation, right? You get a chunk of money and you pay it back with a contractual agreement over a certain amount of time. Equity investment is another way to raise capital, where investors are paid back when the co-op is doing well. You can make an intention to pay back a certain percentage interest rate on the equity investment, but there's usually some flexibility, and you pay it back when the co-op is able to pay it back. That's a nice flexible component. But if you're considering equity investment, make sure you check out securities laws and talk to lawyers. It's a very sticky situation around investor equity and Securities and Exchange Commission. Even small amounts sometimes can trigger those. And then you can get creative, do crowdfunding, barter, pre-sales, but whatever you do, try to do it collectively as much as you can. Don't let one member charge it all on their card. Whenever possible, don't let one member do all the investment because it creates different power dynamics. It creates sticky situations to collectivize the equity down the road. There's a lot more that could be said about capitalizing co-ops. One of the major reasons that small businesses fail, not just co-ops, is that they're undercapitalized. But the good news is there's a lot of great resources, community development financial institutions that are out there to lend to mission-based businesses, to cooperatives. So then, this second tier of work will also be looking at setting up governance and management systems. And there's a whole broad range of systems and structures that you can set up. One common one is for members to be the main decision makers, where the buck stops, and they can elect a board of directors from within the members, or at least majority members. And then the board is involved in strategy and oversight of any management. And then management is in charge of making sure that the business is running well and overseeing the employee owners, the worker owners, or a management team. Now, this is one, process, and it's a pretty cyclical democratic one. But you can really get creative and have committee-based structures. You can have all of your members on the board. You can form an LLC and not have a board and have a collective, especially if you're going to be small and remain small. But you want to set up a system that can grow if you plan to grow. And you can have a very committee-based, team-based system. You can use sociocracy or holocracy, which I mentioned before. Sociocracy for All has lots of information, online trainings about it. And it's a structured way, it's a highly structured way to do very democratic decision processes and governance processes, right? Where you may have a board like Circle, but you have lots of other very empowered circles that are taking on issues of personnel or finance or operations. And as much as you can, as you start up, really try to piece out what is operations, right? The day-to-day decisions, the marketing plan, and um, the peer evaluations, and what is governance? What are the major policies, the strategy, the fiscal oversight? The board role should take on that governance. And if you're a collective and have both operations and governance um, happening by the same people, it's still useful to parse those out and have separate meetings or have separate portions of meetings. So having well-structured meetings in that regard can really help. So parsing out operations from governance can be a really useful tool, even in very early stages. So that's that second arena around business development. The third arena is really engaging with the outside world, right? And building that ecosystem and creating the conditions where you can be a successful co-op. Thinking about technical assistance, connection to social movements, customer involvement, and maybe government interaction. Let me dive into each of those. Getting technical assistance, right? So no one's an expert in everything. There are great technical assistance providers in lots of different arenas. If you're doing a conversion in the Northeast, in a manufacturing arena, then Cooperative Development Institute, for example, has lots of great resources, and they're a good go-to resource. If you're in California, in the restaurant industry, maybe Project Equity is your go-to. And feel free to connect with us. We will help you find those technical assistance resources. We'll think about if there's a co-op developer in your area that you can connect with. Many nonprofits exist around the country with the purpose of supporting worker co-op startups and conversion. So connect with us on that. And like I mentioned before, our co-op clinic has resources too. Co-op developers are often the best to go to around democratic processes, setting up governance before you go to a lawyer, but they can do a whole plethora of things. They can work on your business plan with you. They can do lots of different things. But check out if there's co-op developers in your area. And like I mentioned earlier, there's lots of free or general business support out there for startups and small businesses in general. So look for accelerators in your industries or incubators that are a good fit in your region, those kind of things. So this person will really look out and kind of see what's out there already in the ecosystem where you can get support. And we have a whole network of bookkeepers, accountants, lawyers, co-op developers. So we're really happy to share those resources with you. This person will also be thinking about how to connect to social movements. You may already come from grassroots organization that is connected to a social movement, or you may have it as part of your mission that you can really connect and be a catalyst for change in a certain way. But it's important to really walk the walk. If you're going to say you're going to do something, live up to it. And it's also, co-ops have found that they're very activist founded co-ops that many years in didn't build it into their hiring process to continue that vision, and they see it shifting or diluting or dissipating. So trying to build in those systems, making sure you hire the team you want in both, considering that you reflect your community, so considering equity issues, considering race, class, gender, all those things as you're setting up your core team, as you do your initial hiring, but also thinking about how that vision component really, shared vision, shared mission, and direction can be built into your perpetuation of your team to stay connected to those movements. And there's a lot of great examples of them in the US. In Jackson, Mississippi, Cooperation Jackson has started a network of worker co-ops that are, based in a long history of Black liberation struggles in the South. New Era Windows and Doors Cooperative in Chicago. recovered their factory when it was about to close with their union, and they're involved in industry, fights alongside the union and immigrant worker justice work. Design Action Collective creates and works alongside movements of all sorts. Black Lives Matter movements have all worked with Design Action Collective to create the artwork, the messaging, the visuals that are needed to bring a social movement into an effective public eye. So there's lots of different ways of engaging. We also have a member council at the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops that can connect you around racial and economic justice. You can get involved. Movimiento de Inmigrantes en Cooperativas are immigrant, the whole network of immigrant worker co-ops coming together to move that arena forward. And then Policy and Advocacy Council, there's a very active group that is working on national policy, local policy, regional policies that can create a better environment for cooperatives in lots of different ways. Might you want to work with a union or be a unionized worker co-op in your co-op? Some people have a hard time grappling. Why would you want to be unionized if you're worker owned anyway? But there's lots of benefits to it. Unions have resources, first of all, right? And they have experience, especially with grievance procedures, getting the right health benefits, retirement funds, and it creates another layer of protection, especially for larger co-ops that do have different stratification of power in the co-op. There's collective bargaining that can still happen even in a cooperative way. Now, it's not a conflicting relationship, between the union committee, the union council, and management as it is in other corporations, but there is some power equalization that can happen through participation in a union. And there are several unions that are very active and interested in seeing it as a way of even bringing new energy into the labor movement and engaging with worker co-ops. The steel workers teamed up with Mondragon, that big co-op from Spain, to provide resources for industrial areas in the US. You can check that out at oneworkeronevote.org. coopcincy.coop, Co-op Cincy is another great resource where they're doing a lot of that union co-op work. And one of the largest co-ops in the US, Cooperative Home Care, that has over 2,000 workers, is involved with the SEIU union, and is able to really have an impact broader in their industry of home care, right? Through their participation with the union, they've brought up the whole standards of the home care industry in New York and beyond. So there's lots of reasons, and we have a council at the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops that works specifically on connecting resources and people, and there's a monthly call you can jump on. So go to unioncoops.org for more information about that. So this third arena is also getting commitment and input from customers, right? We talked about how key that is to make sure you're not building your business in a silo, that you're engaging, you're getting feedback. So that might look like selling coupons or pre-sales. That may look like you're going out there and getting contracts, getting pre-organized, pre-agreed upon contracts for your co-op. There's a whole strategy of getting anchor institutions like hospitals, universities, federations of faith-based organizations that aren't going anywhere. That's why they're called anchor institutions. They often have a mission to support the local community. And so local purchasing through contracts with a co-op is one way of meeting the need of your co-op and of those institutions. So consider that as a strategy. Evergreen Cooperatives in Cleveland, Ohio has done that in sort of a top-down approach that have created a lot of jobs for low-income communities. Wellspring Cooperatives in Springfield, Mass. is doing that approach as well. And there's lots of other examples of those anchor institution approaches. So this person might be thinking about, where do I get the contracts? How do I build the right connections to decision makers at those institutions? or at the city government that can connect me with those folks to engage with that. In Worcester, we even tried to get a community benefit agreement with this giant stadium that they were putting up to say buy from co-ops. And we got it in the language that was passed alongside organizing with our community labor coalition. So there are different approaches you can take to building those contracts in that market as well. And then there's polls and forums and feedback and focus groups and social media engagement. So this person should be savvy in how to connect with potential customers in the broader community. Think about how you might align with government goals. Are there preferred vendor contracts that your city or state or municipality provide for local businesses, if you can register as a local business, for employee-owned businesses maybe, for women and minority-owned businesses, for Black, Indigenous people of color-owned businesses, could get access to those preferred vendor relationships. There might be workforce development funds out there for your co-op. So as you do the training, you can get all that covered by grants or low interest loans or things that are set out there for workforce development. Maybe they have a geographic incentive in the neighborhood where you want to start your co-op, and there are different incentives or training programs or things like that available. So connect with your city economic development office if you're in a city, or your municipality or your state, and see how you can connect. So that's the third arena, right? And think about where you are strong, maybe where you and a couple teammates are strong, and where you might want to build more capacity, right? Maybe, you know, we're strong in the co-op capacity arena, so we really need to find someone who can really develop the business and who has started another, you know, small business and can bring that experience. Maybe we need someone really connected that can mobilize allies, you know. So think about where individuals or teams within your founding steering committee can organize themselves and focus in on these. You know, play to your strengths, but also figuring out where you can fill in the gaps, bringing in new members or getting support and training yourself up in the areas you don't have expertise in. This is just one more way of looking at it, right? Communication and workplace democracy arena with the shared vision, membership, decision-making, hiring, business development around your product, finance, legal, management, structure, and then community, right? The marketing, the customer service, supplies, alliances, connections to social movements, all that. So that's one way we talk about, you know, organizing it, and we're gonna come up on questions soon. So start thinking about your questions. Feel free to put them in the chat, or soon come off mute and ask them. But I just wanted to share a few other things about our federation and things that we offer. We are the grassroots federation of worker cooperatives and democratic workplaces in the US. And so we're the ones, you know, leading the charge around policy and advocacy, like I mentioned, both at the state, federal, local levels. And we organize regular events, conferences, webinars, specific trainings, peer-to-peer spaces. And we provide technical assistance, like I mentioned. And if you become a member of the US Federation of Worker Co-ops, you can get access to some great health-related benefits. So vision, dental, disability, and a few others, depending on where you're at. Collectively, we can get access to better prices and good plans that can fit your needs and your workers' needs. So check that out. There's a deadline coming up right around the corner for a lot of those. So if you're interested, get in touch ASAP. December 8th is actually the primary deadline. And if you become a member, you get access to discounts and things like that. There's a startup membership fee, $250, where you can get access to all of this as you're starting up your co-op. And then down the road, it's based on a percentage of revenue or different things that you can work out with the federation. So we have a service provider directory if you want to look up, who's in your area doing co-op work. Check that out at usworker.coop/service-provider-directory. And this is not an updated map. There's lots more stars that should be on there. And there are some great resources online. The Sustainable Economies Law Center at theselc.org, and their other website, cooplaw.org, has lots of great sample governance documents and personnel policies, and they have a monthly legal cafe where you can go and ask questions. Our sister organization, Think and Do Tank, Democracy at Work Institute, has lots of great resources on their website as well. That's the main co-op resource library that you can find at institute.coop. And we have lots of great things on our website as well at usworker.coop. We've just developed these packages, right? Maybe you don't know what you need around bookkeeping, but you know you need bookkeeping. So you can find that on our kind of menu on the website. This is there. You can get a sense of about how many hours it often takes to do a thing. We'll customize it for you, but this is a good tool to think about what kind of technical assistance you might want. We also just came out with these free guides. They're only a couple pages long for some pretty dense topics like onboarding and building your team and hiring. But of course, they point to lots of other resources out there in the ecosystem. But they hopefully break it down in a way where you can really, step by step through these different topics like conflict resolution and accountability systems. Getting funding for technical assistance. You may come to us and say, we need all these things, but we don't have the resources. So we have a resource to help you look for those resources to get the help you need. Setting your membership fee. We talked a little bit about that. Or financing your co-op. There's lots more resources in there of where to look. Setting up your co-op structure, some of the different possibilities of co-op structure and tools to help you get there are in these guides. So check it out at usworker.coop/clinic/startups. And if you're in a rural area, we may have some resources that can cover these technical assistance costs. We have a grant with the USDA, Rural Development, to pay for our peer advisors or to get you some support in technical assistance. So if you're in a rural area, definitely get in touch, and we can often provide the services pro bono. And just again, how it works. So you set up a request on the website, either by emailing me at clinic@usworker.coop or going to the website and clicking support and filling out a quick form. And then you're able to book an intake call with me right away, where we go through specific resources that would be useful for you. And if you have a clear idea of what you need in terms of technical assistance scope of work, we'll flesh that out and we'll find we'll personalize that. We'll send you those resources. We'll send you a draft scope of work. We'll work that out together. And then we'll match you with the right peer advisor that has either the industry experience you need, the language capacity you need, the business planning expertise, whatever it is, we'll match you up. And then we'll send you a bill and get evaluation. Or if we have a grant covered, we'll just say, please let us know how many jobs you created, and we'll celebrate together. So that's pretty much what I have to share today. We're going to have some upcoming webinars in the spring or late winter on topics like building your board and other topics. There are some recordings of those past webinars on conflict and hiring and different things that are on the website. And we just had a worker co-op week in the beginning of November that had some great workshops that you can check out. Those recordings are up there at conference.coop. So, keep an eye out for other upcoming events as we plan them often in January for the year. So feel free to start throwing questions in the chat or come off mute and ask your questions. You know, it's a lot of information, but starting a business, there's a lot to it.
I have a question. I just found out about this group in they formed a co-op conglomerate. They started a limited co-op association in Colorado, and I'm interested in doing the same thing. And I've heard that Colorado is like the new Delaware for starting co-ops, because you can start any kind of co-op in any industry in Delaware and do businesses in any state in the country.
In Colorado. Yeah. So Colorado does have some new co-op statutes. Like you mentioned, the limited cooperative association, which is kind of a mix of the flexibility of a limited liability company with the structure of a cooperative corporation. You know, you kind of get that mix, allow for investor. That one's really set up to have investor classes, you know, as you get going. So especially if you're considering that, it was, you know, it was really initiated by the agricultural co-op industry to have that investor opportunity. But yeah, but you know, in most states, uh, there's going to be something that works for you. And so it really does take talking to a co-op lawyer to understand the benefits or, you know, drawbacks of different statutes. If you do have a worker co-op statute in your state, an employee cooperative corporation statute in your state, those are often really good because they set you up in the arena. But yeah, if you're talking about a conglomerate and need more flexibility, maybe you can do that in an LLC in the state where you're based or going to be doing most of your work, and that might be a most benefit for taxes. So talk to a lawyer and an accountant when you're really clear on where you're going to be doing business. Are you going to be doing it across state lines? Those kind of things. But yeah, Colorado has some interesting new laws. Minnesota has a lot of great laws. There's an LCA statute in Missouri. Um, there's investor opportunities in Oregon, Washington State. So yeah, California has a great community of lawyers looking at new economy and cooperative statute. So, yeah, there's a lot more that could be said, but maybe that answers your question, David. Yes, we could. So there's a question here. David, I'm going to mute you just because there's some background noise. Feel free to unmute if you have another question. Um, but yeah, there's a question here about nonprofits. And I'd love to get into that more because, yeah, staff directed nonprofits or democratic workplaces that are set up as nonprofits are a huge part of our democratic workplace movement, right? Maybe you need to be a nonprofit to access grants or tax deductible donations. So much of the work you're doing in your mission-based, you know, enterprise is charitable work, and you want to be a nonprofit. If you want to be a 501c3 nonprofit, then you can't have that ownership stake, right? You're accountable to the general public. Your board has to be, you know, not all employed and compensated, you know, employees, but there's a lot of flexibility, right? The board can allocate a lot of the management and oversight and a significant part of the governance to the staff, right? So that democratic workplace can really happen in a nonprofit. The Sustainable Economies Law Center has lots of great resources on that. So theselk.org, again, has a whole section on it. And they are themselves a worker self-directed nonprofit and have documented their approach and their use of holacracy. They still have an outside board, but the board is very hands-off in oversight and making sure that they say, in the best interest of our nonprofit, we're going to put a lot of those responsibilities on the staff that know what's going on, right? Of course, there needs to be oversight in how compensation is set and things like that. And you can't have the profit sharing mechanisms, but you can have salary increases as long as there's a transparent way to do it. Check with lawyers on how to exactly set that up, but there's a lot of good resources for that. But that doesn't, just because you're doing, community work in your co-op doesn't mean you need to be a nonprofit either. A lot of co-ops have relationships with a fiscal sponsor nonprofit, right? You can be a for-profit company, a break-even cooperative, whatever you are, and still get access to some of those grant dollars if you find the right relationship with a nonprofit that can act as a fiscal sponsor. Now, there's there's benefits and drawbacks and cautionary tales to be told about that interaction of co-ops and nonprofits. Be sure not to mix your branding too much, so that if the co-op does want to separate and have more independence, that you can really have that independence. It's not really the best practice for the nonprofit, even if they put in a ton to get you going, get those grants, to have a permanent board seat or a veto or a permanent ownership stake or things like that. Those have shown to not be best practice. You want to still have the autonomy. You can't call yourself a co-op really if you are beholden to this nonprofit in perpetuity. So be really intentional about that relationship. Have really clear memorandums of understanding with those nonprofits if you go that route of fiscal sponsorship. Thank you, David, for sharing the Colorado law. There's some exciting new stuff happening in a few states around co-op laws. But there's a lot of flexibility in existing statutes too. So don't feel like you need to go to a whole nother state and have the complexity of filing across, taxes in multiple states and things like that. If you can find the flexibility in the LLC statute or the C corporation statute in your state. Figure out what you want to do, answer a lot of those questions we talked about, then go talk to a co-op lawyer who knows what they're talking about in co-op law. Any other questions? Come off mute or throw it in the chat.
Hi, Matt. Do you mind to share any criteria you've seen or heard around membership?
There's a whole bunch you can talk about that. A lot of co-ops find that it's important to make sure that the incoming potential members have a good match with the culture and mission and meet the needs of the co-op. So trial periods are a common practice to make sure that there's a good fit in that regard. So a certain number of hours or months or number of projects together, whatever, depending on how you're set up, to make sure that fit happens or can be decided. Membership fees are another thing to make sure that people are making a significant contribution to the co-op. Other criteria that, co-ops can decide their own criteria in lots of different ways, certain skills or things like that. But again, it can't be done in a discriminatory way, right? And you should be thinking about equity in how you set up every single component of your onboarding, membership, outreach process, building that team. There's a great resource from Aorta. Let me drop their aorta.coop, the Anti-Oppression Resource and Training Alliance, about building the team you want, right? Hiring the team you want, thinking about anti-oppression in every little step of your hiring process. Other membership criteria. Well, again, there's some great resources in setting those rights and responsibilities that we can share with you, or on institute.coop. There's a democratic management guide that has a great activity on setting rights and responsibilities and thinking about those membership criteria. Trying to think if there's other things across the board that you want to consider. Some co-ops do have local residency requirements. What else? Some have requirements that you do some self-education about cooperatives, right? That you've done a certain number of hours, you participated in committees or trainings. You can send, potential members to this webinar to get the basics. We do this monthly. We do it in Spanish twice a year. There's probably much more. And in that mini guide I mentioned, hiring and onboarding, there's a lot more about membership criteria. So, but that's a good question. Thank you. Part-time and full-time. Well, membership is membership. There's a question here. How do you handle part-time and full-time membership? Membership is membership. When you involve someone at the member level and approve them as a member, they're a member. They have a vote just like anyone who's invested more or anyone who works more hours. But I think the question is also, how do you deal with part-time and full-time workers and employee, right? And part of that is worked out in how you set your compensation, right? You can be very intentional about how you set your compensation model. Part-time employees may have access to certain benefits and not others. Part-time employees may have access to full benefits. You can set that all out. And then in the arena of profit sharing, part-time employees haven't worked as much and won't have as much of a share in the profit, won't have as much patronage at the end of the year. But you also may need to think about good systems of evaluation if you have large disparities in the numbers of hours worked in your co-op too. So it's hard to generalize about that, but it is important to think about it intentionally on the compensation arena, on your profit distribution arena, and on evaluations and accountability systems. Resource for writing local residency. So I know that is in some of the CELC's resources, especially if you're in California. They've looked at the California law in meticulous detail and can give you sample language for local residency. Outside of that, I know of a co-op in the Midwest that does it, and I could help find some specific, but not so much. I don't know if there's great resources out there, but I don't think that differs too much from other companies that might also be looking at local residency requirements. There's a question I must have missed. Bringing the Marcona style law to somewhere in the US. I'm not familiar with that. But if it has to do with Emilia Romagna and the kind of building the kind of the critical mass of cooperatives by reinvesting, having kind of a reinvestment mechanism into co-ops, there's a lot of discussions about that happening in different places around the US on the municipal level or statewide level. So yeah, we can plug you into local networks that might be thinking about that. Human resources stuff. So that isn't that different. Some aspects of human resources aren't that different from other businesses. So you can find someone who's good at HR generally. And we have a couple recommendations, but some of it is a little bit co-op specific. So working with a co-op developer that is experienced in human resources can be a great benefit. So sometimes a lawyer can help with certain HR stuff, but co-op developers can also be a good resource and help you make sure that your position announcements, your job descriptions, your evaluations and benefit packages are all legal and supporting the direction that you want to go. We're running a little low on time, but if there's a last question, feel free to chime in. Well, good luck for, building your team is a very early stage. Hopefully this sets, some examples. I would be intentional about the building of your team, do interviews if you can, really put out a job description for the team member you're looking to bring on, and make sure that they know it's an ownership track kind of situation. And, a lot of people ask, what's the minimum number you need to start a co-op? And some people say 3 or more. There's no hard and fast rule. Plenty of co-ops have been started with a couple people that have a real dedication and wrote their bylaws to make sure that when they grow, and when they grow, they have collective ownership. So no hard and fast rule, but 3+ is kind of generally accepted. So good luck building your teams. Feel free to reach out with any additional questions at Clinic at usworker.coop, or submit that request form. Thanks for hanging in here on a Friday, and good luck with your projects. Take care, everyone.